Today on Anvil of War, we're going full tilt into Chaos Knight's tactics, starting off with the Knight Rampager.
Anvil of War! Let's talk tactics!
Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about the Chaos Knight Rampager, one of my all-time favorite units from the Chaos Knight Codex. But before we begin, if you want to help us support the channel, you can go down, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. We'd really appreciate it. But with that out of the way, let's get into talking about the Knight Rampager. Alright guys, let's jump right into the stat line for the Rampager. You're looking at 12 inches of movement, which is standard for all Knights. One thing to note, it's got the 2+ weapon skill built right into the profile, so you don't need to worry about that. 3-up ballistic skill doesn't even matter for this model whatsoever. 8 strength, 8 toughness, classic Knights, 24 wounds, and 5 attacks built right into the profile again to make up for the 2 weapons that it has. 9 leadership and a 3-up armor save. The Rampager's signature role is Frenzied Rampage, which means on an unmodified hit roll of a 6, you're going to be doing an additional hit, which is really going to come in handy using those big weapons like the Reaper Chainsword or the Gauntlet. Another one that you'll be very familiar with is the Ion Shield, giving it a 5-up invuln against shooting attacks. Something that's new to 9th edition is its super heavy walker rule. And it's, for those of you that aren't familiar, what it's going to allow your knight to do is make a normal advance or move, or advance over enemy units, unless they're a monster or a vehicle. Prior to this, you could only fall back over infantry units, but now your Rampager is able to jump right over that pesky guardsman screen and charge that Leman Russ like nobody's business. The Knight Rampager is a simple beast having no equipment options whatsoever. With that said, I will run down what it is armed with. First off, you've got its heavy stubber, putting out 3 strength 4 shots with no AP and 1 damage. Then you've got the Reaper Chainsword, offering +6 strength for a total of 14, -3 AP, and flat 6 damage. Next up is the Thunderstrike Gauntlet, which is my personal favorite weapon for this unit, going ×2 strength for a total of 16, AP -4, and flat 6 damage. It does come with the downside of the knight being -1 to hit when it does utilize this weapon. However, when you get a kill on a monster or vehicle unit, on a roll of 4+, you can do D3 mortal wounds to a unit within 9 inches, which is always fun to think about. Next up, you've also got the Titanic Feet, going strength user, AP -2, D3 damage, and it gets to make 3 hit rolls for each attack made with this weapon instead of 1. When including this unit in my army, I generally only like to take 1. Being a melee only unit, other than its pitiful heavy stubber, you're really only going to want to have the 1 acting as a large distraction card effects for your opponent. Having 2 of them is a big risk in the sense that you're really banking on getting these expensive units into combat. And if this unit doesn't get into combat, you are losing all the value of it, and you're really not going to earn back its points. With that said, I'm going to talk about some of the different households and custom households you can choose for this unit. Let's start off with the classic melee household, which is Iconoclast, and I'll go through over what that does for the unit as well. So on the charge, or if you are charged or perform a heroic intervention, it's going to give the Rampager an additional +1 attack, as well as an additional -1 AP to all of its weapons. In addition, a little often overlooked rule is that if an enemy unit fails a morale test within 12 of the unit, it's going to lose an additional model in morale. This is a good consideration for 9th edition and something you don't want to forget about when you consider that morale is less punishing in my opinion, and enemy units are going to be losing less models than they were before. Going into households, again, Iconoclast household, there's some custom household traits that are worth considering when you want to take this unit in an Iconoclast household detachment. Another household you might want to consider taking is the Infernal households. What this is going to let you do is activate Demonic Surge at the beginning of your movement phase. So you can either take 1 mortal wound and roll a D3 on the chart, or take D3 mortal wounds and select the option on the chart that you want. For this unit, the main option you're going to be considering is +2 movement and +1 to advance and charge. When this is combined with other stratagems, relics, warlord traits from the Chaos Knight Codex, you can create an extremely fast knight that will zip across the board and take your opponents by surprise. The only downside to choosing this household over the Iconoclast household is you're going to lose out on some key stratagems that keep the unit alive later in the game, which we'll be talking about later. With the release of Psychic Awakening Engine War, we got access to a whole bunch of new household traits that you can apply to your Chaos Knight's army. I'm going to talk about some of my favorite ones with relation to the Chaos Rampager and which ones I think are going to give you the most synergy with this melee-oriented unit. The first one I want to talk about is Abominable Constitution. It's probably my favorite trait out of the book so far, and I'm using it in all my games. It gives your knights +1 movement, which again is going to be helpful for a knight that wants to get into melee. But the bigger buff that it does is that your knights will always count as being on the top movement bracket regardless of how many wounds they've taken. What this means is if you have a knight with 2 wounds left that survives, you can all of a sudden move it back, 13 inches onto an objective. Or if there was a enemy unit that's camping an objective late game that you absolutely need to remove, it is actually going to be able to make that charge. Rather than before, when a knight is on its lowest movement bracket, 6 inches of movement is practically useless for that type of model. The next custom household I'll talk about is Infamous Hereditary. What this lets you do is reroll 1 hit roll in either the shooting, Overwatch, or the fighting phase. This can be a really good tool for the Knight Rampager specifically when you're using the Thunderstrike Gauntlet. Being -1 to hit can reduce your chances of scoring those hits, so having that crucial reroll will definitely help the unit. The last custom household trait that I'll talk about definitely lends itself to an aggressive playstyle that the Knight Rampager is fond of. It's called Pridefield Fury, and what it's going to let you do is when your knight is at half wounds or less, it's going to give them +1 attack as well as +1 to hit in melee. This is going to be really good when using the Thunderstrike Gauntlet or when your knight is just bracketed like it has to be to activate this ability in the first place. It's going to give you that extra buff of giving you another attack as well as giving you the +1 to hit, which is huge. And again, keep in mind that's not going to stack with the Frenzied Rampage because it's an unmodified rule. One of my favorite things to do with the Chaos Knight Rampager is turn it into a Dreadblade. What this is going to do is allow your Chaos Knight to pick some additional abilities that's going to help it out in melee. Some of my favorite abilities to give it, one is Demonic Figure. I would say that is one of the most risky packs you can take, given that it's either going to give your knight +2 movement, +1 weapon skill, or +1 ballistic skill. +1 weapon skill is useless for a Knight Rampager because it's already starting off at a weapon skill of 2+. Ballistic skill, again, equally useless in that you only have a heavy stubber to shoot with. What you're really aiming for is the +2 movement. This can be a huge buff, possibly one of the most powerful for the unit, but you're relying on a D3 roll at the start of the game. So if you fail that D3 roll and you're getting the +1 weapon skill or ballistic skill, you've kind of wasted taking that pact. Another pact that you can take is Thunder's Charge, which for every unit within 1 at the end of a charge on a 4+, you're going to do D3 mortal wounds to that unit. It can really help stack on the extra mortal wounds, especially when you're dealing with units that have a high invulnerable save. You can combine this with some stratagems that I'm going to talk about next to increase that mortal wound output and get through some of those tough saves. The last two I'll talk about are Knower of Profane Secrets, which is great for a Dreadblade. It's going to give you +1 leadership, so you're going to have a leadership of 10, meaning that failing those leadership checks at the beginning of the turn is going to be a lot less of an issue. The other thing it's going to do is refund you 1 command point. That's not much, but it's nice to have, especially when considering taking an extra Warlord trait or relic is going to cost you a CP, so you're pretty much getting one for free at that point. The last pact, which I'll talk about, is Archfiend. This allows you to heroically intervene 6 inches as opposed to the standard 3. For a melee knight, it's very nice to be able to heroically intervene. This is one of the ones I don't normally pick, but it's worth considering. If you choose to make this model your Warlord, or give it a relic or Warlord trait with the stratagems included in the Chaos Knights Codex, I'll give you some suggestions on which ones you should use. My all-time favorite relic is going to be the Gauntlet of Ascension. What this gauntlet does is let you ignore the -1 to hit that's normally incurred by using this weapon. It also will let you re-roll hits and wounds, period. That's a very strong ability, okay? Normally, you're going to be paying 2 command points to use Trail of Destruction on this unit to just reroll hits. So now you can save those 2 command points and use Trail of Destruction on another unit this phase, preferably a Shooting Knight, while you rely on this unit to get in close, and it's got those rerolls built in. As a Knights player, rerolls are a premium. We have very little access to them, so having it built into a relic like this is amazing. If you thought that was the end of it, it's not. When you kill a character, you're also getting an additional +1 attack, which can be really great if you're going up against a character-heavy army. Another relic that I think is worth considering for this unit is the Rune of Nacht Gra. This is only eligible for a Dreadblade unit, but what it'll let you do is select an additional Pact and an additional Damnation. So you're essentially getting an additional ability for your Dreadblade, free. And, not to be underestimated, you're getting a 5-up invuln in combat as well. Normally, Knights will struggle. If you go up against a Thunderhammer wielding Smash Captain, for example, they can take your Knight apart pretty quickly. But having this 5-up invuln in combat really does help improve the survivability of the unit. With that said, I'll move on to some Warlord traits. We're fairly limited in Chaos Knights in terms of the Warlord traits we can take. Personally, I find a lot of them not to be that strong, but I will mention a few here that are really good towards a melee-oriented unit like the Rampager. Start off with Knight Diabolus. It's a classic Warlord trait and will just give you +1 attack. Again, that's just going to help you pummel on those Thunderstrike Gauntlet hits or increase the amount of stompy feet attacks you can make. Another good one is Infernal Quest. This is one I always take in every game. It's going to give your Knight objective secured, much like troops, and during a situation in which that objective is contested, your Knight will count as 10 models instead of 1. Using the Knight's large base size, you can often camp on top of an objective that will make it all but impossible for your opponent to place more than 10 models within 3 inches of that objective, making it a very strong choice. The last one I'll talk about is something I haven't used, but with the smaller deployments and smaller board sizes in 9th edition, I think it could be very cool. It's called Eager for the Kill. What it's going to give you is +1 to your advance and charge rolls, and +1 attack when you're inside the enemy's when you're inside the enemy's deployment zone. So, being that this is a very fast Knight, it can now move over enemy units freely. You're getting potential movement bonuses from other relics or your household traits. Getting into your opponent's deployment zone seems like it might be an easier task, giving this Warlord trait an edge over Knight Diabolus. Stratagems from the Chaos Knight Rampager. One of my favorite ones to use right off the bat is Thunder Stomp. 1 command point lets you do potential D3 mortal wounds to a unit that you're up close with. You do have to get the 4+ off, but again, like I was saying earlier, when you're dealing with units that have a high invulnerable save, Knights will often struggle trying to clear them, so having an additional source for mortal wounds will really help you out. My personal favorite stratagem is Death Grip. 1 command point lets you make another additional attack with your Thunderstrike Gauntlet on an enemy unit that contains 1 model, such as a character or a vehicle or something like that, something that the Knight can pick up and squeeze. What you're going to do is make an additional attack, and if it's successful, the attack sequence will end, and you're going to do D3 mortal wounds to that unit. Afterwards, you're both going to make a strength test. Both players roll off, adding their strength to the total roll. Whoever's got the highest wins. The winner, in this case the Rampager, will continue to crush said model until they lose their strength test. Each time you're successful, you're going to be doing another D3 mortal wounds. Again, a great way to take off a pesky character that has a high invulnerable save. You can't talk about the Knight Rampager without mentioning Full Tilt. 2 command points, advance and charge. If you don't know why that's useful, I can't help you. Trail of Destruction is a classic Chaos Knight stratagem. For 2 command points, you're going to be able to reroll all your hit rolls. This is great when you're putting out a whole bunch of stompy feet attack, or when you're using that Thunderstrike Gauntlet, you've got the -1 to hit, and you really need to kill that other enemy Knight. It's probably worth using this. Moving on to some of the situational stratagems, these ones are only applicable for Iconoclast household. They're called vows, and you can only select 1 of them per unit per game. They're very powerful, and I'll go over some of them. The first one I'll start off with is Vow of Carnage. For 1 command point, what it lets you do is each time your Knight slays 10 models, it will gain an additional attack. It's kind of situational, but it could be good if you're facing a Horde army. The next is Vow of Dominance. This is by far one of the most powerful stratagems in the Codex, if not the entire game. You're probably familiar with Transhuman Physiology from Codex Space Marines. This is that for a knight. For 2 command points, you get to choose one of your knights, and on a wound roll of a 1, 2, or 3, that attack will fail, meaning that your opponent will only wound this Knight Rampager on a 4+. That's an extremely scary prospect when you're considering that's got a 4-up invuln, and you're only being wounded on 4s as it's crossing the table. That's assuming you're rotating your ion shields, which you should. The last one I'll talk about is the Vow of the Beast Slayer. 1 command point, and on any attack against a model with 8 or more wounds, you're going to be able to reroll a wound roll of 1. This is a good vow to pick on something like, say, a Dreadblade, where you've taken the rune of Noctigraw over the Gauntlet of Ascension. Again, going back to that Gauntlet, you're already getting those rerolls built in, so do not take this vow if you're going to run that relic. At the end of the day, guys, the Chaos Knight Rampager is an amazing unit. I think you should include at least one in all of your Chaos Knight armies. I'm glad you enjoyed the video. Please stay tuned for more Chaos Knights content.
Sponsored by...
Why don't you infiltrate on over the subscribe button? Ah, stop your feet!
You just started.
No, please. We're just gonna wrap it up. We're just gonna wrap it up, baby.
You're saying